The 6-year-old girl's scream pierced through the mansion as the glass cup shattered against the marble floor, cutting deep in her tiny foot. But what happened next would haunt everyone who witnessed it. Her stepmother forced little Sophia to press her bleeding face against the cold curtain while she sobbed for mercy, until her millionaire father unexpectedly walked through the front door and shouted one sentence that would expose a web of lies, cruelty, and a chilling truth about the woman he had trusted with his daughter's life. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe, give this video a like, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're tuning in from. Now let's begin. Sophia Miller's world had become a living nightmare since her father Jonathan remarried 5 months earlier. With her biological mother dead since she was 2, Sophia had desperately hoped that Victoria Blake would fill the void in her heart, would become the loving mother she had dreamed of every lonely night. Instead, Victoria had transformed into a monster the moment Jonathan left for his business trips, subjecting Sophia to psychological torture, physical punishment, and emotional abuse that left the little girl believing she was worthless and unloved. The stakes couldn't be higher. If Sophia couldn't find the courage to tell her father the truth, she faced a future of escalating violence that could destroy her spirit completely, while Jonathan remained blind to the fact that his new wife saw his beloved daughter not as a blessing, but as a burden to be eliminated from their perfect life together. Victoria Blake had played her role perfectly during the courtship. She was 28, beautiful, and worked as a receptionist at Jonathan's successful construction company. She had observed him for months, noting his wealth, his loneliness after his wife's death, and most importantly, his guilt over being an absent father due to his demanding work schedule. She crafted herself into exactly what he needed, understanding about his work commitments, gentle with his grieving daughter, and seemingly eager to create a loving family unit. During their 6-month courtship, Victoria was nothing but sweetness and light around Sophia. She brought the little girl small gifts, read her bedtime stories when Jonathan was late, and even helped with homework. She spoke softly about how much she would love to be Sophia's new mommy, how they could have tea parties and go shopping together, how she would braid her hair and teach her about makeup when she got older. Jonathan, drowning in guilt over his wife's death and his subsequent neglect of Sophia due to grief and work obligations, saw Victoria as an answer to his prayers. Here was a woman who seemed to genuinely love his daughter, who could provide the maternal presence Sophia desperately needed, who understood that his business required travel and long hours. When Victoria accepted his proposal after just 4 months of dating, Jonathan felt he was finally giving Sophia the complete family she deserved. The wedding day was perfect. Victoria looked radiant in her white gown, and she made sure to include Sophia in every moment, having her as a flower girl, letting her help cut the cake, even having a special mother-daughter dance where she whispered promises of love and protection in the little girl's ear. Sophia beamed with happiness, finally believing she would have the mommy she had prayed for every night since she could remember. But the mask came off the moment they returned from their brief honeymoon. The first incident happened just 3 days after the wedding. Jonathan had left for a 2-day business trip to finalize a major construction contract. Victoria waited exactly 1 hour after his departure before dropping her sweet demeanor entirely. When Sophia spilled some juice at breakfast, instead of the gentle correction she had shown for months, Victoria exploded with rage. "You clumsy little brat. Look what you've done to my clean kitchen. Your father isn't here to protect you now, and you're going to learn how things really work in this house." Sophia was so shocked by the transformation that she could only stare in confusion. This couldn't be the same woman who had promised to love her forever just days earlier. But Victoria's cold eyes and twisted smile made it clear that the loving stepmother had been nothing but an act. The psychological abuse began immediately. Victoria would wake Sophia at 5 in the morning to do chores that were far beyond her capabilities, scrubbing floors, washing dishes with water so hot it burned her small hands, organizing closets she couldn't reach without standing on dangerous chairs. When Sophia inevitably failed to complete these tasks perfectly, Victoria would scream that she was useless, lazy, and unworthy of her father's love. "Your real mother died because she couldn't stand having such a disappointing daughter," Victoria would hiss during these tirades. "And your father only keeps you around out of guilt. If he knew what a burden you really are, He'd send you away to live with strangers who would treat you much worse than I do. The isolation was systematic and cruel. Victoria canceled Sophia's playdates, claiming the little girl was too misbehaved to deserve friends. She told Jonathan that Sophia was having trouble adjusting and needed more structure and discipline, painting herself as the patient stepmother trying to help a difficult child. When neighbors asked about Sophia, Victoria would sigh dramatically and explain how challenging it was to raise someone else's child, especially one who was acting out due to losing her mother. The physical abuse started small: a pinch when Sophia didn't respond fast enough, a hard squeeze on her arm when she asked questions, yanking her hair when she didn't stand up straight. But it escalated quickly as Victoria realized that Sophia was too frightened and confused to tell her father what was happening. The psychological manipulation was perhaps even more damaging than the physical abuse. Victoria convinced Sophia that every punishment was deserved, that she was inherently bad and needed to be corrected. She made the little girl repeat phrases like, "I am clumsy and ungrateful," and "Daddy would be happier without me," until Sophia began to believe these lies about herself. When Jonathan called during his business trips, Victoria would stand over Sophia during the conversations, her eyes promising terrible consequences if the little girl said anything about their new reality. Sophia learned to sound happy and normal on these calls, telling her father she missed him but was having fun with Victoria, all while her stepmother smiled coldly in the background. The most insidious part of Victoria's abuse was how she used Sophia's love for her father as a weapon. She convinced the little girl that Jonathan's business success depended on having a peaceful home, that any complaints or problems would distract him and cause him to lose everything. She painted elaborate pictures of what would happen if Sophia caused trouble. They would lose their beautiful house. Jonathan would have to work even more hours to make ends meet, and eventually he would blame Sophia for ruining their family. "He married me because he needed someone to take care of you," Victoria would say during her cruelest moments. "If you make me unhappy, I'll leave, and then he'll have to choose between his career and being stuck at home with a needy little girl. Do you think he'll choose you?" This psychological warfare was devastatingly effective because it preyed on Sophia's deepest fears: abandonment and being unloved. Having already lost one parent to death, the thought of losing her father's love through her own actions was terrifying enough to keep her silent through months of escalating abuse. Jonathan, meanwhile, remained completely oblivious to his daughter's suffering. Victoria was masterful at timing her abuse for when he was away, and she had become expert at covering the evidence. Bruises were hidden under long sleeves and pants, even in warm weather. She explained away Sophia's increasing withdrawal and declining grades as normal adjustment issues that would resolve with time and patience. When Jonathan was home, Victoria would revert to her loving stepmother act, though it was now a much thinner veneer. She would hug Sophia in front of Jonathan, but her embraces were tight enough to cause pain without leaving marks. She would speak sweetly to the little girl, but her words carried double meanings that promised punishment later. Sophia's teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, noticed the dramatic changes in her formerly bright and engaged student. Sophia had gone from being one of the most participatory children in class to a withdrawn, anxious little girl who flinched when adults approached her. Her artwork had changed from bright, happy pictures to dark scenes with isolated figures. When Ms. Rodriguez tried to ask gentle questions about home, Sophia would panic and beg her not to call her parents. The neighbor, Eleanor Brooks, had also begun to notice troubling signs. She had known Sophia since birth and had watched her blossom into a confident, joyful child despite losing her mother so young. But recently, she had seen the little girl kneeling in the backyard in the cold, had heard shouting coming from the house when Jonathan was away, and had noticed that Sophia no longer played outside or smiled when she saw friendly faces. Several times, Eleanor had considered calling Child Protective Services, but she hesitated because she lacked concrete proof, and because Victoria had a reputation in the neighborhood as a devoted stepmother who was working hard to help a troubled child adjust to family changes. The few times Eleanor had tried to approach Jonathan about her concerns, Victoria had intercepted the conversations and explained them away as misunderstandings or the child's behavioral issues. The breaking point came on that terrible afternoon when Jonathan was supposed to be away for 3 days finalizing a major contract. Sophia, desperate to please Victoria and hoping against hope that perfect behavior might earn her some kindness, had volunteered to help with housework. She wanted to surprise Victoria by washing and putting away the good dishes, thinking that perhaps this gesture would remind her stepmother of the loving woman she had pretended to be. But Sophia's 6-year-old hands were too small and wet to handle the heavy crystal glass safely. When it slipped and shattered against the marble floor, cutting her foot in the process, she knew immediately that this accident would trigger Victoria's worst punishment yet. Victoria appeared at the top of the stairs like an avenging angel, her face twisted with a rage that went far beyond reasonable anger over a broken cup. This was the moment she had been building toward for months, the excuse she needed to cross the final line from abuse to something even more sinister. "You worthless little brat," Victoria screamed, her voice echoing through the empty mansion. "I am so tired of your clumsy, destructive behavior. You think you can just break whatever you want because Daddy will replace it? Well, Daddy isn't here to protect his precious little princess now." Sophia tried to apologize, tried to explain that she had only wanted to help, but Victoria was beyond listening to reason. The mask had finally come off completely, revealing the cold, calculating woman beneath who had never felt anything but resentment toward the child she saw as an obstacle to her perfect life with Jonathan. "Get away from that mess," Victoria commanded, grabbing Sophia roughly by the arm and dragging her toward the heavy curtains that blocked out the natural light from the living room windows. "You want to act like a baby? Then you can stand in the corner like a baby." But this wasn't the typical timeout that a loving parent might use to teach a lesson. Victoria pressed Sophia's face against the rough fabric of the curtain with enough force to leave marks, ignoring the little girl's tears and the blood still seeping from the cut on her foot. "You stay right there until I decide you've learned your lesson," Victoria hissed, her breath hot against Sophia's ear. "And if you move even 1 inch, if you make even one sound, I will make sure you regret it for the rest of your pathetic life." Sophia stood trembling against the curtain, her small body shaking with pain and terror, while Victoria paced behind her like a predator, deciding how to finish off wounded prey. The afternoon stretched endlessly, with Sophia afraid to move, afraid to speak, afraid even to cry too loudly lest it trigger another explosion of violence. She pressed her face against the curtain and whispered desperate prayers to her deceased mother, begging for rescue that seemed impossible. Her foot throbbed with pain, her legs ached from standing motionless for so long, and her heart broke a little more with each passing minute as she realized that the loving family she had dreamed of was nothing but a cruel illusion. That's when they heard the sound that would change everything. The front door opening and Jonathan's voice calling out, "Sophia, are you home?" He wasn't supposed to return for 2 more days, but his business meeting had concluded early and he had decided to surprise his family by coming home to spend more time with them. The sound of her father's voice was like a lifeline thrown to a drowning child, but also filled Sophia with a terror she had never experienced before. Victoria had threatened terrible consequences if she ever told Jonathan the truth, and now she was about to be discovered in the middle of one of Victoria's punishments. Would this finally be the moment when Daddy learned the truth, or would Victoria find a way to twist this situation and make Sophia's life even worse? But what Jonathan discovered when he walked into that living room was far worse than a simple case of harsh discipline. As he pulled his trembling daughter away from the curtain and saw the fresh blood on her foot mixing with older, faded bruises on her arms and legs, he realized that the woman he had trusted with his daughter's life had been systematically torturing Sophia for months. And the sickening truth began to dawn on him that Victoria's interest in their family had never been about love at all, but about something far more sinister that would soon lead police to uncover a pattern of targeting wealthy widowers and their vulnerable children that stretched back years and had left other families destroyed in ways that made Jonathan's blood run cold. The moment Jonathan's eyes met his daughter's terrified gaze, everything he thought he knew about his life crumbled into dust. Sophia's face was pressed against the curtain with such force that the rough fabric had left marks on her delicate skin. Her little body was shaking uncontrollably, not just from fear, but from exhaustion after standing in that position for hours. The cut on her foot had continued bleeding, leaving a small puddle of red on the marble floor, and her superhero pajamas were torn and dirty. But it was the look in Sophia's eyes that shattered Jonathan's heart completely. This wasn't the bright, curious gaze of his beloved daughter. This was the hollow, haunted stare of a child who had been broken by prolonged trauma. She looked at him, not with joy at his unexpected return, but with terror that his presence might make her situation worse. "Daddy," Sophia whispered, her voice so small and uncertain that Jonathan had a strain to hear her. "You came home early?" The question wasn't asked with a child's typical excitement about a surprise visit. Instead, it carried the weight of months of conditioning that had taught Sophia to view any deviation from expected routines as potentially dangerous. Jonathan's trained eye, sharpened by years of managing construction sites and assessing structural damage, immediately began cataloging everything wrong with the scene before him. The broken glass hadn't been cleaned up, suggesting this incident was recent. The blood trail from where Sophia stood to where the accident had occurred told a story of a small child being forced to remain in position despite injury. Most damning of all, Victoria stood behind Sophia with her hand raised as if she had been caught in the middle of striking the little girl. "Victoria," Jonathan said, his voice deadly quiet. "What exactly is happening here?" Victoria's mind raced as she tried to calculate her next move. She had become so accustomed to manipulating situations in Jonathan's absence that she had grown overconfident in her ability to control narratives. But this scenario, being caught in the act of punishing Sophia with clear evidence of the child's distress and injury, was far more difficult to explain away. "Jonathan, thank goodness you're home," Victoria said, immediately switching to her concerned stepmother voice. "Sophia had an accident with one of the crystal glasses, and I was just implementing some discipline to help her learn to be more careful with expensive things. You know how clumsy she's been lately." But Jonathan was no longer the naive, grief-stricken widower who had been so grateful for Victoria's apparent kindness that he had overlooked warning signs. Something about his daughter's terror and his wife's too-quick explanation triggered an instinct he hadn't felt since his days growing up in a rough neighborhood. The recognition of predator behavior. "Step away from my daughter," Jonathan commanded, his voice carrying an authority that Victoria had never heard before. Victoria hesitated for just a moment too long, her mask slipping enough for Jonathan to see the flash of pure hatred in her eyes when she looked at Sophia. That single expression told him everything he needed to know about what had been happening in his absence. Jonathan moved quickly, scooping Sophia into his arms and feeling her tiny body collapse against him with a relief so profound it seemed to drain all the strength from her limbs. She buried her face against his neck and began to sob, not the loud crying of a child seeking attention, but the broken weeping of someone who had been holding back tears for so long that they came out as silent shudders. "It's okay, baby," Jonathan whispered into her hair, his own voice shaking with emotion. "Daddy's here now. Nobody's going to hurt you anymore." But even as he comforted Sophia, Jonathan's mind was working furiously, piecing together months of small details he had dismissed or overlooked. Sophia's declining grades despite her obvious intelligence. Her withdrawal from activities she had previously loved. The way she flinched when Victoria touched her, which he had attributed to normal adjustment issues. The increasing frequency of accidents and behavioral problems that Victoria reported during his business trips. "Victoria," Jonathan said, his voice now carrying the cold precision of a man who had built a successful business by making difficult decisions quickly and decisively. "I want you to explain to me exactly why my daughter is bleeding, why she appears to have other injuries, and why she was standing against that curtain like she was being punished for something far more serious than breaking a glass." Victoria realized that her usual manipulation tactics weren't going to work this time. Jonathan's demeanor had shifted from the predictable, work-focused husband she had learned to manage into something far more dangerous. A father who had finally recognized a threat to his child. "She's been acting out more and more," Victoria said, but her voice lacked the conviction of her previous lies. "She broke the glass deliberately, I think, to get attention. Sometimes children need firm discipline to learn proper behavior." "Firm discipline?" Jonathan repeated, his voice rising slightly as he looked down at his daughter's injuries. "Is that what you call making a 6-year-old stand bleeding against a curtain for what looks like hours?" Sophia stirred in his arms, and when she looked up at him, Jonathan saw something that made his blood run cold. She was terrified not of Victoria's punishment, but of his reaction to learning the truth. "Daddy," Sophia whispered, her voice barely audible, "please don't be mad at me. I didn't mean to break the cup. I was trying to help make everything nice for when you came home." The fact that his daughter's first concern was protecting him from disappointment, even while she was clearly the victim of abuse, told Jonathan everything he needed to know about the psychological manipulation she had endured. "I'm not mad at you, sweetheart," Jonathan said firmly, loud enough for Victoria to hear every word. "You are not in trouble. You have done nothing wrong. The only person who should be worried about my anger is anyone who has been hurting you." Victoria watched this interaction with growing panic. She could see her carefully constructed life beginning to unravel, and her desperation was making her reckless. "Jonathan, you're overreacting. All children need discipline, and you're never here to provide it. Someone has to teach her proper behavior." "Discipline?" Jonathan's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper as he noticed more details about his daughter's condition. "Is that what you call the bruises on her arms? The way she flinches when you move? The fact that she's lost weight and looks like she hasn't been sleeping?" Jonathan's professional success had come from his ability to read people and situations quickly, and now all those skills were focused on the woman he had married. He could see the calculation in her eyes, the way she was already formulating her next lie, and suddenly he understood that this wasn't a case of discipline gone too far. This was systematic abuse by someone who had specifically targeted his family. "I think you need to leave," Jonathan said quietly. "Now, this is my house too," Victoria replied, but there was an edge of desperation in her voice now. "I'm your wife, and that child needs structure and discipline that you're too guilty to provide." "No," Jonathan said, his voice carrying a finality that surprised even him. "This is my daughter's house. This is my daughter's safe place, and you have just forfeited any right to be in either of our lives." That's when Victoria made her fatal mistake. Instead of continuing to play the role of misunderstood stepmother, her real personality emerged completely. "Fine," she snarled, her beautiful face twisting into something ugly and cold. "You want to choose that ungrateful little brat over me? You have no idea what you're giving up, Jonathan. You'll never find another woman willing to deal with your baggage and your pathetic, needy daughter." The venom in her voice when she referred to Sophia as baggage and pathetic was so shocking that Jonathan actually stepped backward. This wasn't anger or frustration. This was pure hatred for a 6-year-old child who had done nothing but hope for a mother's love. "Get out," Jonathan said, his voice deadly calm. "Get out now, before I call the police and have you arrested for child abuse." Victoria laughed, a sound without warmth or humor. "Child abuse? You think anyone will believe that? I'm a respected member of this community. I volunteer at the church. I'm always polite to the neighbors. And everyone knows how difficult it's been trying to help a disturbed child adjust to losing her mother." But Jonathan was no longer listening to her denials. He was focused entirely on his daughter, who had gone very still in his arms. When he looked down at her face, he saw something that broke his heart. Sophia was looking at him with a mixture of hope and terror, as if she couldn't quite believe that someone was finally standing up for her, but was afraid to trust that it was real. "Sophia," Jonathan said gently, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. What happened to you today, what's been happening to you when I'm not here, none of it is your fault. Do you understand me? You're not bad. You're not clumsy. You're not ungrateful. You are my beloved daughter, and you deserve to be treated with kindness and respect." Sophia's eyes filled with tears, but for the first time in months, they weren't tears of fear. "Really, Daddy? Even though I broke the cup and made Victoria mad?" "Especially then," Jonathan said firmly. "Accidents happen, sweetheart. That's why they're called accidents. And even when children make mistakes on purpose, the adults who love them find kind ways to teach better choices. They never, ever hurt them or make them feel afraid." Victoria watched this tender moment between father and daughter with undisguised contempt. "This is exactly why she's so spoiled and difficult," she snapped. "You refuse to discipline her properly, and then you wonder why she doesn't respect authority." Jonathan looked up at Victoria with an expression that made her take an involuntary step backward. "The only authority I'm concerned with right now is mine as Sophia's father, and I am telling you to leave this house immediately. And if I refuse? Victoria challenged, but there was uncertainty in her voice now. Then I will call the police, show them my daughter's injuries, and let them decide whether what happened here today constitutes child abuse, Jonathan replied calmly. And while they're investigating that, I'll also ask them to look into your background a little more thoroughly than I apparently did before I married you. Something flickered in Victoria's eyes at that last statement. Not anger, but fear. Real, genuine fear that suggested Jonathan had inadvertently hit on something significant. What do you mean? Victoria asked, her voice carefully controlled. I mean, I'm starting to wonder who you really are, Victoria Blake, Jonathan said slowly, watching her reaction carefully. I'm wondering about the life you had before you came to work at my company. I'm wondering about other families you might have been part of, other children you might have helped discipline. The color drained from Victoria's face so completely that she looked like she might faint. Jonathan's random threat, born from his growing suspicion that this abuse was too systematic to be a first-time occurrence, had apparently struck much closer to home than he had imagined. You don't know what you're talking about, Victoria said, but her voice lacked conviction. Then you won't mind if I hire a private investigator to look into your past, Jonathan replied calmly. After all, if you've been honest with me about who you are and where you came from, there shouldn't be anything to worry about. Victoria's reaction was immediate and telling. She began backing toward the door, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape route or calculating what she could grab before fleeing. I don't have to listen to this, she said, but she was already moving toward the stairs, presumably to pack whatever belongings she could carry quickly. No, Jonathan agreed. You don't. But you also don't have to come back. Consider this the end of our marriage, Victoria. I'll have divorce papers drawn up immediately, and I'll be requesting a restraining order to keep you away from my daughter. Victoria paused at the bottom of the stairs, her hand gripping the banister. You're making a huge mistake, Jonathan. You have no idea what you're giving up. I know exactly what I'm giving up, Jonathan replied, his arms tightening protectively around Sophia. I'm giving up a woman who hurt my child, and I've never been more certain of a decision in my life. As Victoria disappeared upstairs, presumably to pack her belongings, Jonathan carried Sophia to the kitchen to examine her injuries more carefully. The cut on her foot needed immediate attention, and he wanted to document any other signs of abuse before Victoria could claim they were accidents or the result of normal childhood activity. Daddy, Sophia said softly as he cleaned the cut on her foot. Are you really going to make Victoria leave? Yes, baby, Jonathan said without hesitation. She hurt you, and people who hurt children don't get to stay in their lives. You will never have to be afraid of her again. But what if she comes back when you're on business trips? Sophia asked, and the terror in her voice told Jonathan that Victoria's threats had been very specific and very frightening. I'm not going on any more business trips, Jonathan said firmly. Not until we figure out a way to make sure you're completely safe and happy. My company can survive without me traveling for a while, but you and I need to focus on taking care of each other. Sophia was quiet for a long moment, processing this promise. She said if I told you what was happening, you would send me away to live with strangers who would be even meaner to me. Jonathan felt his heart break all over again at this revelation. Victoria hadn't just been physically abusing his daughter. She had been systematically destroying Sophia's ability to seek help or trust that adults would protect her. That was a lie, Jonathan said gently but firmly. A terrible, cruel lie designed to keep you scared and quiet. You are my daughter, and you will always be my daughter. There is nothing you could ever do, nothing that could ever happen, that would make me send you away. Do you understand me? Sophia nodded, but Jonathan could see that it would take time and patience to undo months of psychological manipulation. Victoria had been expert at exploiting a grieving child's deepest fears and insecurities. They heard footsteps on the stairs and the sound of the front door slamming. When Jonathan looked out the window, he saw Victoria loading suitcases into her car with swift, panicked movements. She was leaving much faster than someone who was simply responding to an ultimatum about their marriage. She was fleeing like someone who had much more to lose than just a comfortable lifestyle. Is she really gone? Sophia asked, hardly daring to believe it. She's really gone, Jonathan confirmed. And tomorrow, we're going to make sure she can never come back. But neither Jonathan nor Sophia realized that Victoria's rapid departure wasn't just about avoiding divorce proceedings. It was about escaping before a more thorough investigation could reveal that Victoria Blake was an identity she had assumed less than 2 years ago, and that there were other families in other states who had suffered similar tragedies after welcoming a charming young woman into their homes and hearts. 3 days later, as Jonathan held Sophia's trembling hand in the police station while she bravely told Detective Sarah Martinez about months of hidden bruises and whispered threats, the investigation into Victoria Blake's true identity exploded into something far more sinister than anyone had imagined. The woman they had known as a devoted stepmother was actually Linda Carson, a wanted fugitive who had spent the past 8 years systematically targeting wealthy widowers with young children. And the detective's face went white with horror as she revealed that Victoria's previous stepchildren in Arizona and Colorado hadn't just been abused, they had disappeared entirely. Their heartbroken fathers left to search for children who would never come home, because Linda Carson had perfected the art of making families believe their missing children had simply run away from her reasonable discipline. The Riverside Police Department had never handled a case quite like this one. Detective Sarah Martinez, a 15-year veteran with specialized training in crimes against children, had initially expected to process a straightforward domestic abuse case. Single father discovers new wife has been mistreating his child, divorce, and restraining orders follow. Everyone moves on with their lives. But Jonathan's insistence that they investigate Victoria's background more thoroughly had opened a door to something much darker. The first red flag had come within hours of Victoria's departure. When Detective Martinez ran a basic background check on Victoria Blake, she found employment records going back exactly 18 months, right around the time Victoria had started working at Jonathan's company. Before that, Victoria Blake simply hadn't existed. No credit history, no previous addresses, no school records, nothing. That's unusual, but not necessarily criminal, Detective Martinez had explained to Jonathan during their first meeting. Some people have reasons for wanting to start fresh: bad divorces, family troubles, financial problems. But given the circumstances with your daughter, I think we should dig a little deeper. The deeper they dug, the more disturbing the picture became. The Social Security number Victoria had used belonged to a woman who had died in a car accident 3 years earlier. The references she had provided for her job application led to disconnected phone numbers and fake addresses. Even her driver's license, which had seemed perfectly legitimate, was a sophisticated forgery that had somehow passed the DMV's verification systems. Mr. Miller, Detective Martinez had said grimly, "Your wife has been living under a completely fabricated identity. This isn't someone trying to escape a bad relationship. This is someone with extensive experience in creating false documentation and assuming new identities." That revelation had been disturbing enough, but it was what happened next that transformed the case from identity fraud to something much more sinister. Detective Martinez had sent Victoria's photograph and physical description to other law enforcement agencies, asking if anyone had encountered similar cases involving women who targeted single fathers with young children. The response had been swift and horrifying. Detective Robert Chun from Phoenix, Arizona, called within 24 hours. "We've been looking for this woman for 3 years, he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "She was calling herself Rebecca Martinez here, and she insinuated herself into the life of David Santos, a widower with a 7-year-old daughter named Isabella." "What happened to the family?" Detective Martinez asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Isabella disappeared 6 months after Rebecca moved in. David came home from a business trip to find Rebecca gone and Isabella missing. Rebecca left behind a note claiming that Isabella had run away because she couldn't accept having a new stepmother, and that Rebecca couldn't handle the stress of dealing with such a troubled child." Detective Martinez felt her blood run cold. "But you don't believe the child ran away?" Isabella was 7 years old and had never been away from her father for more than a few hours, Detective Chen replied grimly. "She didn't take any belongings, didn't touch her savings account that had over $200 in it, and left behind her beloved stuffed elephant that she hadn't slept without since her mother died. 7-year-olds don't run away from home with nothing but the clothes on their backs." "Did you find any evidence of foul play?" "We found evidence that Rebecca Martinez had been systematically isolating Isabella from her friends and extended family, convincing David that the child was troubled and needed intensive one-on-one care. Neighbors reported hearing the child crying for hours when David was away. But Rebecca always had explanations. Isabella was throwing tantrums, having nightmares about her dead mother, refusing to accept discipline. Detective Martinez was taking notes furiously, her mind racing as she recognized the identical pattern to what had been happening with Sophia. What happened to the father? David Santos spent every penny he had hiring private investigators to search for Isabella. He sold his business, mortgaged his house, and eventually lost everything trying to find his daughter. Last I heard, he was working as a night security guard and still putting up missing person flyers on weekends. The call from Detective Chun had been devastating enough, but it was only the beginning. Over the next 48 hours, similar reports came in from Colorado, Nevada, and Oregon. The woman had used different names: Susan Parker, Jennifer Wells, Michelle Davis, but the pattern was always the same. She would target successful single fathers with young children, present herself as the perfect stepmother, gain access to the family's financial resources and personal information, and then disappear with the children under circumstances designed to make it look like the kids had run away from her reasonable discipline. How many children are we talking about? Jonathan asked when Detective Martinez briefed him on these developments. So far, we've confirmed 5 missing children across 4 states over the past 8 years, she replied. All between the ages of 6 and 9, all from wealthy families. All disappeared under suspicious circumstances after this woman had been in their lives for 6 to 8 months. Jonathan felt sick as the full scope of what had almost happened to Sophia became clear. You think she was planning to take my daughter? I think your early return from that business trip saved Sophia's life, Detective Martinez said bluntly. Based on the timeline and the escalating abuse your daughter described, I believe Victoria was in the final stages of preparing to disappear with Sophia. The investigation had revealed the sophisticated nature of Linda Carson's operation. She didn't just assume false identities. She researched her targets extensively, learning about their businesses, their deceased wives, their parenting insecurities, and their travel schedules. She crafted personalities specifically designed to appeal to each individual father, becoming exactly what each man needed to believe he had found. She had detailed files on you and Sophia hidden in her car, Detective Martinez explained. Photos taken without your knowledge, copies of Sophia's school records, information about your business finances, even psychological profiles she had compiled about both of your personalities and vulnerabilities. The most chilling discovery came when they found Linda Carson's playbook, a detailed manual she had written for herself about how to identify, target, and manipulate grieving families. It contained specific scripts for conversations, timing charts for escalating abuse, and most horrifying of all, detailed plans for how to make children disappear in ways that would look like they had run away voluntarily. She documents everything, Detective Martinez explained to Jonathan and Sophia during one of their interviews. She takes notes on what works with each family, what doesn't work, how to improve her approach for the next target. This isn't impulsive criminal behavior. This is a systematic operation she's been perfecting for years. The FBI had joined the investigation by this point, as the case clearly involved multiple jurisdictions and what appeared to be an organized pattern of child trafficking. Special Agent Rebecca Torres, who specialized in crimes against children, had flown in from the regional office to coordinate the multi-state investigation. We believe Linda Carson is part of a larger network, Agent Torres explained to Jonathan. The sophistication of her false identities, the quality of her forged documents, and the systematic nature of her targeting suggests she has resources and assistance that go beyond what one person could manage alone. The search for the missing children had intensified dramatically once investigators realized they were dealing with someone who had been perfecting this operation for years. But the trail was cold on most of the cases. Linda Carson was expert at disappearing without leaving traces, and the children she had taken seemed to vanish into thin air. The good news, Agent Torres said, is that your daughter's testimony has given us more insight into Carson's methods than we've ever had before. Most of the previous cases, the fathers were so devastated by their children's disappearance that they weren't able to provide detailed information about the abuse patterns that preceded the kidnapping. Sophia, meanwhile, was showing remarkable courage in helping with the investigation despite the trauma she had endured. With the help of child psychologists and victim advocates, she was able to provide detailed accounts of Victoria's behavior, threats, and methods that helped investigators understand how the operation worked. Victoria told me that if I was bad, she would take me somewhere far away where Daddy could never find me, Sophia told Detective Martinez during one of their careful interviews. She said there were places where bad children went to live with people who would make me wish I had been good for her. These statements, combined with the evidence found in Linda Carson's belongings, painted a picture of a predator who had been using psychological torture to prepare children for disappearance. She would systematically break down their resistance, convince them they were unwanted and unloved, and then present herself as their only option for survival when she took them away from their families. The breakthrough in the case came when investigators discovered that Linda Carson had been using a specific type of encrypted communication system to stay in contact with others involved in the network. FBI computer forensics experts were able to partially decrypt some of her communications, revealing references to delivery dates, buyer preferences, and most chillingly, inventory management. We believe she's been trafficking these children to buyers who specifically request children from wealthy families, Agent Torres explained to Jonathan privately, away from Sophia's hearing. There are people who pay premium prices for children who have been conditioned to be compliant and afraid to seek help. The investigation had also revealed why Linda Carson had fled so quickly when Jonathan confronted her. She had been scheduled to deliver Sophia to her contacts within the next 2 weeks, and Jonathan's unexpected early return had disrupted a timeline that had been planned down to the minute. She had already prepared Sophia's disappearance, Detective Martinez explained. We found a fake runaway note written in what she thought was her daughter's handwriting, and a detailed story about Sophia being unable to accept discipline and running away to avoid consequences for her behavior. As the investigation continued, the FBI began using Linda Carson's communication networks to track down other members of the trafficking ring. The operation was much larger than anyone had initially suspected, with connections to similar cases across the country and even internationally. But the most important development came when one of Linda Carson's encrypted communications revealed the location where she had been holding the missing children before they were transferred to buyers. A warehouse complex in Nevada had been converted into what could only be described as a prison designed specifically for children. The FBI raid on the warehouse was coordinated with military precision. Agent Torres led a team of specialists trained in rescuing trafficked children, while local law enforcement provided backup, and medical teams stood by to treat whatever they might find. What they discovered inside the warehouse was both horrifying and hopeful. 4 of the 5 missing children from Linda Carson's previous operations were alive, though severely traumatized from months or years of captivity. Isabella Santos, David's daughter from Arizona, was among them, along with 2 other children who had been missing for over 2 years. The children were found in individual rooms designed to look like normal bedrooms, but equipped with locks on the outside and no windows. They had been told that their families had abandoned them because they were too difficult to manage, and that Linda Carson was the only person who cared enough to find them new homes with families who might want them despite their problems. The psychological manipulation was extensive. Dr. Patricia Williams, the child psychologist brought in to help with the rescued children, explained to the FBI team. These children have been systematically convinced that they deserved what happened to them, that their families didn't want them back, and that resistance would only make their situation worse. The reunion between Isabella Santos and her father David was captured by news cameras and became one of the most emotionally powerful images in the coverage of the case. David, who had spent 3 years searching for his daughter and nearly lost everything in the process, collapsed to his knees when he saw Isabella walking toward him, supported by FBI agents. "Daddy," Isabella had whispered, her voice uncertain after years of being told her father had given up looking for her. "Yes, baby," David had sobbed, pulling his daughter into his arms. "Daddy's here. I never stopped looking for you. I never gave up." The successful rescue operation had made international news, but for Jonathan and Sophia, the most important result was knowing that the woman who had terrorized them was finally in custody and would never be able to hurt another family. Linda Carson was arrested in Nevada, trying to flee the country with false documents and over $200,000 in cash. When FBI agents surrounded her at the airport, she showed no remorse for what she had done, only anger at being caught before she could complete what she called her retirement plan. She's a sociopath, Agent Torres explained to Jonathan. She genuinely doesn't understand that what she did was wrong. In her mind, she was providing a service to families who couldn't handle difficult children, and she deserves to be paid well for that service. The trial preparation revealed the full scope of Linda Carson's crimes. In addition to the 5 confirmed kidnappings, investigators found evidence linking her to at least 12 other suspicious disappearances of children from single-parent homes across the country. The financial record from her operation showed that she had been paid millions of dollars over the years by buyers who specifically requested traumatized children who had been broken in and were unlikely to try to escape or seek help. For Sophia, learning that she hadn't been Victoria's only victim was both devastating and strangely comforting. It meant that what had happened to her wasn't her fault. She hadn't been uniquely bad or difficult. Victoria had been a predator who would have hurt any child in her position. It helps me understand that Victoria never could have loved me, Sophia told Dr. Williams during one of their therapy sessions. She wasn't looking for a daughter to love. She was looking for someone to hurt and then steal away from their family. The psychological healing was slow and difficult, but Sophia showed remarkable resilience. Having her father's complete support and unwavering belief in her innocence made an enormous difference in her recovery. Jonathan had kept his promise about not traveling for business, instead focusing entirely on rebuilding their relationship and helping Sophia heal from the trauma. They had also received tremendous support from the other families affected by Linda Carson's crimes. David Santos and Isabella had become particularly close friends with Jonathan and Sophia, bonding over their shared experience and helping each other navigate the long process of recovery. It's like having a dad and a sister who really understand what we went through, Sophia had told Jonathan after one of their visits with the Santos family. The media attention had been intense, but largely positive. Sophia's courage in testifying against Linda Carson had inspired other children to come forward about abuse they had suffered, leading to additional arrests and rescues across the country. The courtroom was packed on the day Linda Carson was sentenced. Jonathan held Sophia's hand as they listened to the judge deliver a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole on multiple counts of kidnapping, child abuse, and human trafficking. The defendant has shown a complete lack of remorse for crimes that destroyed families and traumatized children in ways that will affect them for the rest of their lives, Judge Patricia Coleman said before delivering the sentence. The systematic nature of these crimes, the calculated cruelty involved, and the defendant's continued insistence that she did nothing wrong demonstrate that she poses an ongoing danger to society that requires permanent incarceration. Linda Carson showed no emotion as the sentence was read. She sat calmly at the defense table, occasionally taking notes, as if she were attending a business meeting rather than her own sentencing for some of the most heinous crimes imaginable. But when the judge asked if she had any final words, Linda Carson turned to look directly at the families of her victims sitting in the courtroom gallery. "You people have no idea what you've done," she said, her voice cold and matter-of-fact. "Those children needed discipline and structure that you were too weak to provide. I gave them purpose and direction. You should be thanking me." The gasps and angry murmurs from the gallery were quickly silenced by the judge's gavel. But Linda Carson's final words had revealed the complete absence of humanity that had made her crimes possible. 5 years later, Sophia stood confidently before a packed auditorium at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, her voice clear and strong as she addressed an audience of law enforcement officials, child protection workers, and families affected by trafficking, telling them, "I survived because my daddy came home early that day, but mostly because I finally understood that the bad things happening to me weren't my fault, and that there are always people who will fight for children if we can find the courage to tell them the truth." The Linda Carson case had led to the rescue of 47 children from trafficking networks across 6 countries and resulted in legislation requiring more thorough background checks for adults working with children, while Jonathan's foundation had established safe houses and counseling programs that help hundreds of families rebuild their lives after trauma. Today, 11-year-old Sophia is an honor student who volunteers at victim advocacy centers, teaching other children that healing is possible and that speaking up about abuse can save not just your own life, but the lives of countless others who are still trapped in darkness waiting for someone brave enough to turn on the light. The years following Linda Carson's conviction have been a journey of healing, growth, and unexpected purpose for both Jonathan and Sophia. The trauma had changed them both in profound ways, but it had also revealed reservoirs of strength and compassion they hadn't known they possessed. Jonathan had made good on his promise to prioritize his daughter above his business commitments. While his construction company continued to be successful, he had restructured his role to eliminate the extensive travel that had made Sophia vulnerable in the first place. He hired additional management staff, invested in video conferencing technology, and learned to delegate responsibilities that he had previously felt only he could handle. I realized that no business success could ever be worth risking my daughter's safety or happiness, Jonathan explained to a reporter during one of the interviews about their foundation's work. The most important job I'll ever have is being Sophia's father, and I nearly failed at that because I was so focused on providing financial security that I forgot to provide emotional security. The legal proceedings had taken nearly 2 years to fully resolve, but the outcome had been comprehensive and satisfying. Linda Carson received multiple life sentences that ensured she would never again be able to harm children. More importantly, her arrest and the evidence uncovered during the investigation had led to the dismantling of an entire trafficking network that had been operating for over a decade. The FBI's investigation had ultimately identified and rescued 47 children from various stages of the trafficking pipeline. Some, like Isabella Santos, had been held in the Nevada warehouse. Others were discovered in foster homes run by Carson's associates, where they were being prepared for eventual sale. Still others were found with buyers who had purchased them for various forms of exploitation. Each rescue operation was carefully planned and executed with teams of child psychologists, medical professionals, and specially trained law enforcement officers who understood the complex trauma these children had experienced. The healing process was long and difficult, but the majority of the rescued children were eventually reunited with their biological families or placed in loving adoptive homes when family reunification wasn't possible. The ripple effects of the case extended far beyond the immediate victims. Congress passed the Sophia's Law legislation, which required more comprehensive background checks for adults working with children in any capacity, including volunteers, coaches, tutors, and potential adoptive or foster parents. The law also established a national database of individuals suspected of targeting children for exploitation, making it much more difficult for predators to move from state to state and assume new identities. Jonathan and Sophia had established the Light in the Darkness Foundation, with the insurance money from Jonathan's dissolved marriage to Linda Carson and matching contributions from other families affected by the trafficking network. The foundation operated several programs designed to prevent child trafficking and support survivors of abuse. Their flagship program was a network of safe houses where rescued children could begin their healing process in environments specifically designed to help them recover from systematic psychological and physical abuse. The houses were staffed by trauma-informed therapists, medical professionals, and carefully screened volunteers who understood the specialized needs of trafficking survivors. We learned that traditional child protection services, while well-intentioned, aren't always equipped to handle the specific trauma patterns created by systematic trafficking operations. Dr. Patricia Williams, who had become the Foundation's chief psychological consultant, explained, "Children who have been trafficked need specialized treatment that addresses not just the abuse they've suffered, but the complex psychological manipulation that was used to control them." The Foundation also operated educational programs in schools, teaching children about personal safety, appropriate boundaries with adults, and most importantly, that they should never be afraid to seek help if an adult makes them uncomfortable or asks them to keep secrets about their interactions. Sophia had become the Foundation's most effective spokesperson, despite her young age. Her presentations to children were age-appropriate and non-frightening, focusing on empowerment rather than fear. She taught kids about trusting their instincts, recognizing when adults violated appropriate boundaries, and understanding that children are never responsible for the bad behavior of adults. "I tell them that if a grown-up makes you feel scared or sad or confused, that's your brain trying to protect you," Sophia explained to a group of second graders during one of her school presentations. "And if a grown-up tells you not to tell other grown-ups about things they do or say to you, That's when you definitely should tell someone you trust. Her presentations to adults were more detailed and harder hitting. Sophia, now 11 years old but speaking with wisdom far beyond her years, shared the specific tactics Linda Carson had used to isolate and control her, helping parents, teachers, and child protection workers recognize the early warning signs of systematic abuse. Victoria didn't start by hitting me, Sophia explained to an audience of social workers and law enforcement officers. She started by making me feel like I was always doing something wrong, like I needed to try harder to make her happy. She made me think that my daddy's love for me depended on whether I was good enough for her. By the time the physical abuse started, I was already so scared and confused that I thought I deserved it. The Foundation's work had expanded internationally as other countries recognized the need for specialized approaches to combating child trafficking. Jonathan and Sophia had consulted with law enforcement agencies in 12 countries, helping them develop programs similar to what they had created in the United States. The personal healing had been just as important as the public advocacy work. Sophia had continued with regular therapy throughout the years, working with Dr. Williams and other specialists to process the trauma and develop healthy coping mechanisms. The nightmares had eventually stopped, the hypervigilance had faded, and most importantly, her natural curiosity and joy had returned. The most important part of Sophia's recovery has been maintaining her sense of agency and empowerment, Dr. Williams explained. Rather than seeing herself as a victim of circumstances beyond her control, she's learned to see herself as a survivor who took action to save herself and who now uses that experience to help others. Sophia's academic performance had not only recovered, but had exceeded her previous levels. She was consistently on the honor roll, had developed a particular aptitude for writing and public speaking, and had expressed interest in pursuing a career in law enforcement or child psychology when she grew up. "I want to help catch the bad people who hurt kids," Sophia explained when asked about her career goals. "And I want to help the kids who got hurt learn how to feel safe and happy again, the way Dr. Williams helped me." The relationship between Jonathan and Sophia had grown stronger than ever. The shared trauma and their work together on the Foundation had created a bond based not just on love, but on mutual respect and shared purpose. Jonathan frequently marveled at his daughter's resilience, intelligence, and compassion, while Sophia had learned to trust completely in her father's protection and support. "I used to worry that I wasn't a good enough father because I worked so much," Jonathan reflected during a recent interview. "But going through this experience with Sophia taught me that being a good parent isn't about being perfect. It's about being present when your child needs you and never giving up on fighting for them." They had also maintained close relationships with the other families affected by Linda Carson's crimes. Isabella Santos and her father David had become like extended family, and the children had formed a support network that helped all of them process their experiences and move forward with their lives. The annual reunion gathering of all the families had become a celebration of survival and healing rather than a memorial to trauma. Children who had once been isolated and terrified now played together, laughed together, and supported each other through the ongoing challenges of recovery. It's amazing to see how these kids have turned their worst experiences into sources of strength and purpose, Dr. Williams observed during one of these gatherings. They've learned that they can face terrible things and not only survive but thrive. The media attention had gradually decreased over the years, but Sophia's story continued to inspire people around the world. She received letters from children who had found the courage to report abuse after hearing her speak, from parents who had learned to recognize warning signs they had previously missed, and from adults who had survived childhood trauma and found hope in her message of healing and empowerment. "The letters mean everything to me," Sophia said. "Every time someone tells me that my story helped them or their family, it makes everything we went through feel worthwhile. It means Victoria didn't win. She wanted to make me disappear, but instead, my voice is reaching more people than ever." The Foundation's most recent project was developing virtual reality training programs for law enforcement officers, social workers, and medical professionals, allowing them to experience scenarios similar to what trafficking victims encounter so they could better understand the psychological dynamics and respond more effectively. Traditional training methods can teach people what to look for, but they can't teach them what it feels like to be a child in these situations, Jonathan explained. The VR programs let adults experience something closer to a child's perspective, which helps them respond with the right combination of authority and compassion. As Sophia prepared to enter middle school, she faced the typical challenges of adolescence along with the unique challenges of being a public figure and trauma survivor. But she approached these challenges with the same courage and determination that had saved her life years earlier. "I know I'm different from other kids my age because of what I've been through," Sophia acknowledged. "But I don't think of it as a bad thing anymore. I think of it as preparation for helping other people who are going through similar things." The foundation had also begun working on prevention programs, recognizing that the most effective way to combat child trafficking was to prevent children from becoming vulnerable to predators in the first place. These programs focused on strengthening family support systems, providing resources for single parents, and creating community networks that could identify and assist at-risk families before crises developed. We learned that Linda Carson specifically targeted families who are isolated and struggling. Jonathan explained, "If we can create stronger community support systems and better resources for families in crisis, we can make it much harder for predators to find vulnerable targets." The work was emotionally demanding, but it was also deeply rewarding. Every child who was rescued, every family that was reunited, every predator who was arrested represented a victory against the forces that had once threatened to destroy their own family. "Sometimes people ask me if I wish none of this had ever happened," Sophia said during her most recent presentation. "And of course I wish I had never been hurt, and I wish those other kids had never been hurt either. But if going through that experience means we were able to save other children from the same thing, then I think it was worth it." As she concluded her presentation that day, Sophia looked out at the audience of professionals dedicated to protecting children and delivered the message that had become her signature closing. "The most important thing I want you to remember is that children are braver and stronger than adults usually think we are. We can handle the truth about difficult situations. We can be part of the solution to problems that affect us. And we never, ever give up hope that someone will listen to us and help us. Your job is to be the kind of adult that kids like me can trust to believe us, protect us, and fight for us when we find the courage to ask for help." The standing ovation that followed was not just appreciation for her words, but recognition of the extraordinary journey that had transformed a terrified 6-year-old victim into a confident 11-year-old advocate whose voice had become a beacon of hope for vulnerable children around the world. If Sophia's story has moved you, if it's reminded you of the importance of listening to children and protecting the most vulnerable members of our society, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Share this story with others who need to understand that every child deserves to be believed, protected, and loved. Together, we can ensure that no child suffers in silence, and that every cry for help is answered with the protection and justice they deserve. Remember, your awareness and vigilance might be the difference between a child's safety and their victimization. Be the adult that a child can trust to listen, believe, and act. See you in the next video.